Hello everyone, welcome back to the another session in Principles of Programming Languages. Today we'll be going to start about the second unit. Second unit is all about the data types. So basically we are very much aware of the data types, what we have in the programming languages. But concerned to the principles of programming languages, we'll be going to know about the data types what are existed respective to the programming languages and the design issues what we can perform on the data types. Now let's get started to know more about the data types. So what is a data type? Data type definition is what? The data type defines a collection of data values. It basically defines collection of data values and a set of predefined operations on those values. This is what the definition of a data type. And coming to the design issues of data types, we'll be going to talk about what are the operations which are defined and how are they specified. I have mentioned a point clearly that this is not particular to a language. This is all about talking about the data types concerned to the many programming languages. Now, let's understand about what are the data types we do have. Basically, this slide will give you a knowledge that the number of data types what basically we have respective to the programming languages. And those data types are primitive data types, character data types, string data types, user-defined ordinal types, and sub-range types, arrays type, associative arrays, and record types, union, pointer, reference. These are all what data types we have. So these are all different kind of values what we can see respective to the languages. Now, so for this video, we'll be going to talk about first primitive data types. Now, let's talk about primitive data types. Primitive data types is what? The data type which is defined in its own form. The data type, if I say the data type is integer, now integer should not be defined in any other program and other terms. Now I say that integer is a data type. When integer belongs to primitive, integer belongs to primitive data type if and only if it defines in its own form. Then integer belongs to primitive data type. So basically we have primitive data types which are numeric types, Boolean types and character types. Let's talk about numeric types. So basically numeric types are what? Numeric types are many early programming languages had only numeric primitive types. So this first major programming language is Fortran. Fortran allows only primitive data types to define any kind of program when you wanted to take a value to perform a set of operations on it. And not only Fortran, the other second programming language is Algol. Even Algol takes numerical type predefined data type into the consideration. From this point, you can understand one thing that many early programming languages had only numeric primitive types. As I mentioned, Fortran, Algol are the fundamental major programming languages. You can say it is early programming languages. These languages will accept numeric as primitive data type. And numeric types are play a central role among the collections of types supported by contemporary languages. So as these are the data types which are the fundamental or which are primitive and which are being initiated from the language existment. From that they play a vital role in the programming language to define any kind of value into it. And those numeric types are integer, floating point, decimal, Boolean and character types. Let's talk about each in detail. The next is about integer. Right. So what do you mean by integer? Integer is a fundamental data type. If you see in any of the programming language, The most common primitive numeric data type is what? Integer. Many computers now support several sizes of integer. Now here I have to tell one point very clearly. Java is a programming language. It accepts all kind of sizes of integers. Let's say that it supports byte, and it supports short, int and long. It supports these kind of data types into it. So that the point is, here Java includes 4 signed integer sizes which I specified. And not only Java, there is the other programming language which also accepts C++ and C#. These two programming languages also will accept the user to define primitive data type. And in the case of C++ and C#, you can take, it includes unsigned integers types, which are simply types of integer values without sign. And especially unsigned integers in these two languages will represent binary data. Finally, integer is accepted as a primitive data type in all imperative programming languages. So to know more about imperative programming languages, you can visit once again the first unit to refer about what are imperative languages and what are the features of it. Now, the next is about floating point representation. So floating point representation is what? The values are represented as fractions and exponents. So basically, floating point representation is also the one of the primitive data type, which is accepted by many contemporary programming languages. When I say it, there are two things what you have to keep in mind. It's about float and double. So what is float? Float and double were categorized according to the size of it. Now, you might be heard about this, right? The IEEE 754 format. So that format will tell you about the way how floating number can store. So how it can store, a floating point number can store with precision and range. That means if I take floating point representation, that is to store here, we'll store a sign bit and that will take 1 bit. And this is what? We'll give here 8 bits of data and here it is of 23 bits. So hence 23 plus 8, it is 31 plus 1, 32. And we all know that float will take 4 bytes of size, memory size. And the same can be applied for double. Double also takes 8 bytes of data to store the data values into it. So these are what two kind of representations what we basically made into your floating point. And there are two things what you have to notice over here, precision and range. Precision is what? It is an accuracy of the fractional part of a value measured as the number of bits. And range is what? It is a combination of the range of fractions and more important, the range of exponents. So these are two terms which give you more about floating point representation. And the next is about complex. Complex is a primitive data type. I told you in the beginning of the video that the data type is said to be primitive if and only if it can be defined in its own term. Complex is a primitive data type. So if you see the programming languages what I have specified over here, which are Fortran and Python, you can define complex as it is in Fortran and Python. That means in Python you can write complex data type. You don't need to get any substitution to define these complex data types. You directly can initialize a value of it. If I gave something like print 7 plus 3j, then I'll get in the form of complex. Here you can see a complex part and imaginary part. Python, the imaginary part of a complex literal is specified by the following it with j or capital J. And languages that support a complex type include operations for arithmetic on a complex values. And we'll see about the next primitive data type, which is used in almost all major programming languages, and that is decimal. Decimal is one of the primitive data type, and it is being used for a special purpose. The special purpose is what? Decimal is used by the COBOL programming language. It is being used by the COBOL programming language. COBOL basically stands for Common Oriented Business Language. common business oriented language. COBOL basically common business oriented language. This is the language which is specially for business applications. And most larger computers that are designed to support business systems applications have hardware support for decimal data type. And the data type which uses in COBOL is what? Alphanumeric. Now I'll show you with an syntax. Basically we'll write these kind of syntax in COBOL. To represent a decimal point data type, we use these kind of representation. So this is all about primitive data types.